even in the story of Galileo himself, it's pretty clear that there were cardinals who favored Galileo, and there were cardinals who opposed him. And the people who really hated him were not the cardinals or the church leaders, they were the Aristotelian philosophers. They were the cutting-edge intellectuals of their day. Galileo was undercutting their intellectual prestige, and it has to be said, Galileo, who was probably not the world's most tactful person, went out of his way to offend them, and they eventually got him. But it was not simply the church against Galileo. In fact, one of the cardinals who most strongly supported him later became Pope, and actually did all he could to mitigate the punishment of Galileo. So it's oversimplified. And a lot of us, too, have learned much of what we know about science and religion from a play, a very famous play, called Inherit the Wind. Any of you seen that? Yeah. This forms what we know about the Scopes monkey trial and all that sort of thing. But it is historically false in almost every major detail. There's a recent book by Edward Larson called Summer for the Gods, which won the Pulitzer Prize, by the way, which analyzes the Scopes trial and shows, among other things, that that play is wrong. And it was never really about religion versus evolution or something like that. But this idea that we had a Galileo event, and now the obscurantist Mormon church was about to be brought down by heroic science. It's just the latest installment of this ongoing drama, which turns out to be fictional from the start, and it's never really true. And so it was ridiculous once more in this case. The thing really got going when a former Mormon plant geneticist down in Australia signed on. He had some actual relevant scientific expertise. He was, if a plant geneticist, well, at least a geneticist of a sort. And so he began talking about this, and it began to get news attention. Now, all along this time, I've been pestering certain colleagues, trying to get them to write. And one of them in particular kept responding, but it's stupid. This is idiotic. There's nothing to this story. And I kept saying, but you got to tell people that. They don't all know that. They think that this has real merit, and that the church is really on the ropes, and we're in real trouble here. Well, it's absurd. Well, finally, I still remember the email that I got from this one particular scientist who I think had been reading the LA Times about the Book of Mormon DNA issue. And I'd been working on it for 2 or 3 years by this point. And he was always about to do something, or maybe he'd get around to it, or who knows. Well, I got a 2-word email from him, which was, "Let's rumble." He'd had it. And so he and I, for the next couple of weeks, it was really kind of fun. Sort of like playing Mormon tag team apologetic wrestling or something. We ended up doing interviews all over the place. It was astonishing who was interested in this case. Not only the LA Times, the Seattle, whatever it is. What's the paper in Seattle? Seattle Times. Post-Intelligencer, that's right. The Scotsman, if you can believe it. The Economist. Papers all around the world. It was really quite amazing to me, the level of interest. Now, usually, the story was told basically by the critics, but we would always get in a couple of lines. My line was to say, well, I think it rests on a naive reading of the Book of Mormon. And finally, the other fellow, Mike Whiting, developed a really good line. I thought this was a nice one. He said, because they'd ask him, well, what about this Galileo event idea? And he'd say, well, there's one major difference. Galileo got the science right. That kind of does what we need to do. So we showed up all over the place, and it was a lot of fun. But the most important lasting aspect of it was that a number of articles eventually began to appear in the Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, in the Farms Review, most of which are included in the volume that I guess maybe has been introduced to you here. It's sitting up here on the table anyway. I was so late, I don't know if it has been introduced to you, but this is the Book of Mormon DNA Research, which collects those articles. And I guess my purpose tonight is sort of introduce the volume and tell you something of what's in it and where these articles come from, who the people are that do them, and sort of how the issue stands. This is the first in a series of books that we're calling the best of the Maxwell Institute. It's an idea of taking some of these things that are published in sort of perishable places, the journals that we publish, and putting them in more permanent form together, so that a person who's really interested in a given issue, like DNA in the Book of Mormon, can have pretty much what we've done on it. We haven't included all of the articles, but most of the ones that we've published on the subject are here. In thinking about this, I thought of a line from Hugh Nibley that I thought was really relevant, and I included it in my introduction to the volume. Now, this is what he wrote in 1967. The normal way of dealing with the Book of Mormon scientifically has been first to attribute to the Book of Mormon something it didn't say, and then to refute the claim by scientific statements that have not been proven. And I think, 4 decades after that statement, that's essentially still correct. That's still where we stand on a lot of these issues. And so on both sides of this argument, you're comparing the Book of Mormon to DNA research. On both sides of it, you've got people substantially distorting the situation. Distorting what the Book of Mormon says, distorting the state of current genetic science, DNA research. The first article in the volume, after my introduction, is John Sorensen's article, The Problematic Role of DNA Testing in Unraveling Human History. It was actually published before the DNA and Book of Mormon issue became a really big thing among the general public, before it hit the press. This was one lucky case of getting something out there as a sort of preparatory thing. I hate, more than anything, I hate playing catch-up. I hate knowing that a big issue is coming, and yet waiting until after it's hit the press to begin to respond. I want to fire a shot across the bow before it really gets going. And in this case, we had this out. Now, his article serves as a sort of introduction to the subject. He highlights the complexity of the research, the tools that are used to conduct it, and he draws some cautionary tales from the past, where certain people, the old saying that to anybody who has a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? In certain cases where where some new method is discovered, people think, now this is it. This will settle every single question. All other historical tools are now obsolete. We have DNA. We can settle everything with it. Well, in fact, DNA's uses are important, but they're limited. And they're especially limited now. We may get better at it in the future, but there may be natural limits to it. I mean, it's never going to be the thing that will answer any and all historical questions. And that's what he's trying to point out. It's just a basic primer, really, on the subject, to say, calm down, take it easy. We've had these things before. Blood types were a big thing a few years ago, a few decades ago. Turns out they can do certain things. There are other things they can't do. Then in a short piece, John Butler, who's the lead scientist, who was the lead scientist in developing DNA tests to identify the victims of the attacks on 9/11 at the World Trade Center, wrote something for us. Now, I have to say something about him. Every once in a while, somebody comes along that could have been designed for my purposes. I remember years ago, I was trying to find someone to respond to an article that had been published on population figures in the Book of Mormon. And I was looking around for somebody who might be able to say something about that subject. And then I discovered there was a Latter-day Saint who was involved with Cambridge University's computer program, CamSim, which was designed to simulate ancient population figures in the ancient world. And this guy was a Latter-day Saint. He had all the credentials that I could possibly want. I remember another case where we needed someone to respond to a psychobiography of the Book of Mormon. And I discovered that there was a fellow at the University of Michigan, Michael Gibson, MD, PhD, who was a big Farms fan, and who is the head of a segment of the psychiatric training at the University of Michigan Medical School, who also writes like a dream. And so I asked him if he'd be willing to write a review, and he wrote a wonderful review of this thing, which not only took a serious bite out of that particular psychobiography, but much to my amusement, took several serious swipes at Freudianism in general. It was immensely fun to read. So I've gotten to the point where I almost expect people like this to show up, when they're necessary. People with amazing credentials. John Butler is one of those. He, in his first article for us, and he's written two, points to what he sees as insurmountable difficulties in identifying the genetic heritage of the chief ancestors of the Lehite people. One of his points is that the females in the Lehite colonies all inherited their mitochondrial DNA, and that's the relevant DNA in this, for the most part, from Ishmael's wife, about whom we know almost nothing, including whether she was a full-blooded Israelite. We know nothing. Who in the world is she? You know her name? So you know her DNA signature? Fact is, we don't. It's the mitochondrial DNA, of course, that's crucial. It's passed along maternal lines. So we lack sufficient ancient data to compare modern Amerindian DNA to. That's his point. He says, and this is simply inescapable. There's nothing you can do about it. We're talking a very specific population here, and we don't know anything about their DNA. And we lack, in general, overall, much information about pre-captivity